For questions for our panel today, we'd like you to use the Q&A feature. So please make sure to enter your questions through that feature on Zoom. Next slide. Finally, I'd like to introduce our panel members today. It's being moderated today by Dr. Erika Augustine from Kennedy Krieger. And our panelists are Dr. Higginbotham from Emory, Dr. Meyer from the United States Army of Medical Research and Development Command, Dr. Schneider from Stanford, and Dr. Wu from the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Augustine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Lucy, and good afternoon, good evening to all of you who've joined. We're really excited to chat with you today, at least by Zoom. And I'm excited to kick off this afternoon's Physician Scientist Career Path panel. I'm Erika Augustine. I'm Associate Chief Science Officer and a child neurologist at the Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore, Maryland. And I'm really delighted to be joined by our panel today. This session is really for you, and so we want this to be open. As much as there can be a discussion, we'd like to do so. So we really encourage and invite you to use the Q&A feature to add your questions. I'll keep track of that through our session today and try to ask as many questions as possible to our panelists. Similar questions I'll try and group together. And if you have a question for a specific panelist, I'll just ask that you please put their name there with your question, and I'll make sure to direct that question to that person. Otherwise, I'll make some judgments and try and think about who might be best to address the question at hand. So why don't we dive in? Let's start with just getting to know each one of you a little bit. If you could please introduce yourself and tell us about your research. Let's start with Dr. Wu.
Not going alphabetically. My name is Dan Wu. I'm Vice Chair for Research at the University of Cincinnati. I'm a stroke neurologist. I study mostly the genetic epidemiology of stroke, in particular brain hemorrhage. And as far as my career path, I was not going to be a scientist. I was going to do my fellowship, hang up my shingle, and be the best darn stroke neurologist in my particular community. And one day I was treating a patient, and I took them from aphasic, right hemiplegic, almost all the way back to normal using an investigational therapy. And at that moment, I had this kind of realization that, you know, when I'm a fine doctor, I take good care of the patients that I see every day. But what my mentor did when he brought TPA and intraarterial therapy to the world was to help thousands of people that he would never meet. And I thought, wow, what a neat thing to do with your life, you know? And so I thought, maybe I could make an impact like that. And that was probably the first time I really became interested in becoming a scientist and a researcher. And then I went on to get a K Award and multiple grants, and that's sort of my career path.
Thanks, Dan. Why don't we go to Dr. Meyer?
All right, good evening, everyone. I do not have the most typical career path. My kind of subspecialty expertise is in neuroinfectious disease and neuroinflammation. And, you know, I came to medical school really wanting to work on issues of health equity and global health. And so I've had not a very typical career. It started out pretty typical. I did a fellowship after neurology as a Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholar, which is a program focused on community-based participatory research, policy, and health economics. And then got funded as a kind of fellow / junior faculty to really start a global health research endeavor in Kenya. And so I was based there for about 10 months out of the year for nearly 7 years and did research focused on neuroinfectious diseases associated with HIV, as well as some other diseases that were of interest to colleagues there, such as cystosarcosis. And in around 2017, I decided to leave academics because I think similar to Dr. Wu, I sort of had this epiphany. I was doing a lot of field epidemiology and public health and some clinical research. And really what I realized is we didn't have the therapeutics that would work in the setting that I was working in. And I was just very frustrated by having a lack of tools to really make the kind of impact that I wanted to make on health. And so while it doesn't sound like it's a natural fit, I actually started working for the US Army They run a lot of clinical trials and have medical product development efforts focused on what the military calls austere settings and what kind of civilian academic folks call global health settings. And so currently, I work for someone who oversees around 40 different medical product development efforts. We work on everything from vaccines to blood products to drugs and devices. And I provide technical oversight of all of our programs and I provide linkages with our science and technology partners who do the early stage research. So we have around 40 different products that are in late phase clinical development, really phase 2 and onward. And I do a lot of regulatory work and interagency collaborations with FDA as well. So, grand summary.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and already sort of hear these themes across both you and Dr. Wu around those shifts in your career, that science really can be, or pursuit of science really can be, an extension of all of those things that drove us to clinical care in the first place, our desire to help people, and research as a way to sort of expand the scope and the scale of the way that we do that. Dr. Higginbotham, what about you?
Hi, I'm Dr. Lenora Higginbotham. I'm an assistant professor at Emory University, and I did my movement disorder fellowship at Emory University before joining faculty in 2018. I think I will continue the trend as someone who never really thought I would be doing a combination of bench and clinical work, not necessarily med school and not even necessarily in residency, but that's how it ended up. So in our Emory University medical school program, there was about 6 months dedicated to research time, and I kind of had an interest in neurology and just kind of did a blitz of like big names in neurology at our institution and found Alan Levy, who actually ended up being one of my mentors for that 6-month period. And I did a lot of proteomics work in Alzheimer's dementia. And then I really enjoyed it. I was really inspired. I really wanted to do research, thought I would fall more into clinical research. However, it didn't actually stick that well. I did some chart reviews, a little bit of clinical research, dabbled in translational research and fellowship. So I kind of took a winding road. I always knew I wanted to do some sort of research. And then when I ended up doing my movement disorders fellowship at Emory, and I was coming out and I was looking for jobs and sort of went back a little bit lost because the research I had been doing, translational research, wasn't taking off as well as I planned, and I didn't have really the funding that I needed to really jumpstart my career. So I went back to like my mentors where I'd been most successful, which was back in med school with research. And interestingly, that brought out an opportunity where our proteomics lab had just grown so exponentially, and they were looking to move outside of Alzheimer's disease into Parkinsonian disorders, and particularly Parkinsonian dementia. And that was my interest. And reading more about the lab, I really liked the direction and ended up doing a variety of different things to kind of jumpstart my funding at the beginning of my career. So I did a R01 diversity supplement, also applied for a T32. So those were kind of like my backup to get started. And then have continued funding with the AAN and Bright Focus research grants, so foundation grants. And recently just got, will likely get funded on an R21, which is another kind of like 2-year NIH research grant. So all these like kind of smaller grant mechanisms as I reapply for my K23. So that's how I've been. So my research now is really focused about building kind of a biospecimen cohort for Parkinsonian disorders within our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, getting brains and CSF and et cetera, and then doing proteomic work for like multiplex proteomic assay biomarker discovery and Parkinsonian dementias to kind of complement the Alzheimer's work our lab is doing.
Thank you. I think that already starts to get to some of the questions that we're seeing come into to our question and answer period. So we may come back to that discussion around transition periods, around funding, and how you get started. And Dr. Schneider.
Thanks. Yeah, those are very illustrious careers already that I have to follow. So, but again, just like everybody else, it's somewhat circuitous to get to the path that we're at now. I know that there are some people who are born knowing what Nobel Prize they want, and I'm certainly not one of those people. So I kind of go with the flow. I actually even started out as a business major, and wanted to be one of the people who toppled our economy in 2008. Then went a different path and came into medicine, and got exposed to research early on, doing a summer research program as part of medical school, and then followed that up in medical school with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Research Fellowship at the NIH, which is a life-changing experience. I worked with Dr. Hallett there on psychogenic movement disorders, got really interested in the mind part of medicine, and then went into neurology residency, did that for a while, followed that up with a sleep medicine fellowship, which took me a bit away from my primary area of cognitive neurology that I was most interested in, but then saw some of the best cognitive and movement disorder neurology I saw, much better than anything I saw in residency, was during just 1 year of sleep fellowship. So it was great. After that, I decided to do a T32 postdoc in sleep and genetics, which was a new foray. I was convinced by one of my mentors here at Stanford, Dr. Meyer, who discovered the underlying basis of narcolepsy, the genetic basis of it, as a neurologic disorder, not a psychiatric disorder. And he's like, oh yeah, just do some genetics, click a button, we'll start writing some papers. Not how it worked out. 3 years later, after that postdoc, the T32 postdoc in sleep and genetics, realized, wow, this is really biostatistics. And it actually made me realize that that's where my area of interest and expertise was not so much I have this path and I'm going to forge there, but a passion for the riddles and solving those riddles, which is really kind of how biostatisticians help everybody. They're interested in all these different projects and how to answer those questions. And so that's really where my interest expanded, is like I got much deeper into statistics, much deeper into machine learning, which is really cachet out here in Silicon Valley, as you might imagine, and translated that back into my original passion, which was cognitive neurology. And so that moved me over to the Stanford VA Alzheimer Center, where I'm a Meyer investigator. Sleep over here is in psychiatry, so I'm a psychiatrist neurologist essentially, and do a lot of work on trying to find sleep biomarkers of neurodegenerative disease. So there's a brain age metrics that can come out of neuroimaging, but also out of polysomnography and even potentially out of your daytime behaviors. So we're looking at trying to diffuse all of these things and make our center, our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, a center of excellence for sleep-based biomarkers and interventions in cognitive neurology. And that's where I stand now.
All of you, your work is really different. You touch on really different aspects of translational research, or their translational research spectrum, as well as the diseases of interest. But I really appreciate that all of you talked about your passion and where that came from and how that launched you into your careers with those twists and turns that they took along the way. We're starting to see questions come into the Q&A. Please keep them coming. I did add to the chat some things. Often there are numbers and NIH grant types that we refer to, R01s, R21s, K23s, all of these various things. There's a link in the chat that perhaps can help decipher the alphabet soup a little bit. It's more than we have time to go into here, but again, hopefully that can help to decode some of these things. So I'm going to start with the first question that from a person who is really interested in doing research with human subjects and clinical trials. But many of the research pathways and pipelines that this person has found have been really basic science oriented. And so I'll pose this question actually to Dr. Meyer and Dr. Wu. What tips do you have for pursuing training in clinical research? Maybe we'll start with Dr. Meyer.
Sorry, slow to come off mute. So, I mean, I think first, depending on what kind of research is going on at your institution, I would reach out to one of the researchers there to see if you can get involved in one of their studies, and just to learn to see if it's actually something you want to do. It's a little bit of a labor of love, I think, for those of us who work with human subjects. It can be very challenging and time consuming, but it's what I'm most passionate about doing. And so I think getting that experience is probably the first step. Looking at your institution, or if you're thinking about fellowship, looking at institutions that have specific training in clinical research or translational research. There are a number of CTSA, or clinical translational science, and I forget what the A stands for. So hopefully someone else on the panel remembers. But
Award.
Sorry?
Award.
Thank you. You'd think I would remember that. But seek out one of the CTSA programs. They usually have a 1 to 2 year kind of focused, intensive clinical research training program. And I think that's essential. Without having kind of that foundation and research methods, understanding biostatistics for any kind of research, it's challenging, but I think especially for clinical research. And then depending on what your specialty is, there are often large clinical trial networks that are doing research in something that you're interested in. And so, reaching out to one of your mentors to have them propose you to participate in some of those large networks is a great way to get experience. I think one of the challenges with doing clinical trials is they're very expensive. And so typically the PIs for those types of studies tend to be quite senior. So as a junior person, it can seem very daunting trying to figure out how to get involved, but there are many, many different ways to participate and kind of grow your career in that field.
And Dr. Wu, any additional advice or guidance?
Yes, the NINDS Clinical Trials Methodology course is given every year. A number of people who are interested, junior people who are interested, will be paired then with a senior mentor as well as a biostatistician. And you literally meet with them weekly, and they will help you to design your clinical trial. And all the people there are early career investigators that can help. And then your question about the pipelines, there are, I think, just as many pipelines. You just got to look for them. AAN, AFAR, all these other different foundations, things like that. There are many different ways of getting people interested in doing clinical science research. But those would be my two big suggestions. CTSA, by the way, I would second and comment. That is a great opportunity. KL2s and other career training programs, protected time in order to develop your career.
Thank you. Let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum, of the research spectrum. And this is a question for Dr. Higginbotham. How is your path to find research and career mentors from proteomics to clinical work, then back into proteomics? What was the key component to determine your primary research mentor? And what did you gain from your clinical years that helped you move into that particular research field?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. I think the way that I kind of came full circle back to the same mentors often leads me to say, like, there are differences in mentors at different levels, and I would never say any of my mentors have been bad. I've had a variety of mentors now because I did after medical school and had mentors there in proteomics, and then went to residency at Johns Hopkins, had some mentors there, came back to fellowship, had different mentors in movement disorders group there, and then actually circled back around to my former proteomic mentors. And I will say the main difference, I think, is that you might like get a bunch of mentors and who have a genuine interest in your career. But I will say, I think I returned to the mentors who have really been like real champions for me, like somebody who were real cheerleaders, like that you don't lose over time. And usually I say it's actually those people don't come along very often. So even though people are really involved in they may have good wishes, but like these, I don't know, maybe it also might be in the position these mentors are in or where I was in different parts of trading. But I think I just established a really good relationship with these individuals in med school. And that is exactly why when I was kind of feeling kind of lost about what to do, because I was literally on the verge of going into locums, because I was told that there was no money to actually protect my time to start a, I was coming out of fellowship. I had been doing some translational research. I had been applying for grants and fellowship, just wasn't getting them. And I was told there was no money to really protect my time. And the research I was doing was very different, electrophysiology. And I had a great mentor, but more junior and just not in a position to really lift me up or float me or do anything in that regard. So I went back to people where I knew I trusted, and it actually turned out to be a really great opportunity for me in the long run, because I'd always been interested in just biomarker. My underlying goal was biomarker research and in Parkinsonian dementias, the electrophysiology work I was doing, looking for electrophysiological biomarkers. And it was just a nice, well, we're doing biomarkers too, but it's not just straight proteomics anymore. It's networks, and we're doing all these different things. We've grown so much. And it was just remarkable, the sense of oh, these, they're just so excited to see you. I don't know. It's just a feeling of fitting into this group. And I was I remember how this felt. I really like how this feels now. I think I'm gonna go with this. And sure enough, this lab, and I've still done continued a little bit of my other research, but now my pure focus is proteomics. And I'm I just drunk the whole Kool-Aid. I'm all in. We all we'll just talk it up a whole lot. We do this network strategy that's great. And I really enjoy what I do. But I think on top of that, these my mentors, Nick Seafried, Dr. Levy, they've been really champions. The reason why I'm naming off all those grants is because they make me apply for all those grants, but in a nice way. And I've just been able to support I was able to apply for grants coming out of fellowship just after meeting with them to propose to do, and that's how I got 80% of my time protected when I started faculty at Emory. So I applied right away for an R01 diversity supplement after meeting with them in a T32. And then I got the R01 diversity supplement, which is a great opportunity for people of diverse backgrounds, and got on that, and then have been applying for grants literally ever since. And I think the moral of the story is, if you have a good mentor, if you have a good feeling about a lab and a research, and it's what you want to do, and you always feel good with those people, just hang on to them and use them when you need direction. Hopefully that answered the question.
So Dr. Higginbotham, you talked about that feeling when it's the right fit, when you've clicked with your mentors, you're working towards complementary goals, they're able to sponsor and lift you up. Dr. Schneider, I'm wondering if you could say a bit about how you go about trying to find that mentor, how you look, what you look for.
That's thanks. That's a great point. And I think Lenora really raised a really important point. Mentorship is not it. And as you mentioned, Dr. Augustine, it's also about sponsorship, right? So if you're talking about just having somebody who's helping guide you through that path, money, unfortunately, is what keeps you afloat and allows you to be supported. And not just sponsorship financially, obviously that's a critical thing, but sponsorship like your champion, your cheerleader, as Dr. Higginbotham was mentioning, right? You want to make sure that people are advocating for you, not just guiding you along the path, but actually putting their neck out to help you. And sometimes junior faculty are not able to do that. And so this is, the advice for mentorship actually came to me from Steve Zeiler when I was in residency, is that you don't want a single mentor. You actually need many mentors. You need lateral mentors who are, you're benchmarking against. Unfortunately, our class had to contend with Verena Stedka, who, I think her Nobel Prize is coming in a couple of years. So certainly it pushed us to try and achieve, but I didn't think I could actually aspire to that. But then you also need near-term mentors, these junior faculty, or fellows, med students, residents, other people who are just beyond you, who can help pull you up to the next rung, or at least give you guidance on how to get there. And then of course you need the actual mentor who can pull the strings, the person who can give you this guidance, who has the proteomics lab that's well established, that has financial funding, that has a network of individuals who they can actually reach out to get things done on your behalf. And then of course you have this other aspirational mentor, like our department chair, Dr. MacArthur, who everybody would just like to be this amazing human being, just in general. But obviously that's more, a more distant type of mentorship where you're just idolizing something like that. But once again, it's really this network of mentorship. And one of the most important people in that mentorship network is somebody who can actually sponsor you for in whatever way they can. So obviously finances make a big part of that. And even in the story that Dr. Higginbotham was sharing, it resonated with me in the sense that, I'm out in Silicon Valley. Atherton is the 99th percentiles, cost of living zip code in the country, which is just down the road. Stanford pays the first percentile wage. And when you get a postdoc salary from the NIH, I don't think they have a 0th percentile, but that's what you're living on. And so sometimes there are like major sacrifices that you're doing, and you're kind of scrapping it together to be able to then get that runway accomplished, to be able to make that next step where you can actually transition into grants that actually can support you independently, as well as launch that next stage of your careers. Because even early career awards are sometimes difficult, so you really have to search from many different places, get foundational grants and what have you. But and your mentors need to force you to do that, right? Because it's hard. The grants are not the gratifying part of research. It's nice when you get that paycheck, but it's not the gratifying part of research. So you need people to keep driving you, have that 30,000 foot view context to help get you there. And that's part of the sponsorship as well.
So Dr. Wu, both Dr. Higginbotham and Dr. Schneider, and thank you, Dr. Schneider, in the context of talking about their paths and about the work with their mentors, talked about funding. And I'm wondering if you can provide some advice and guidance around a few points. Those just getting ready to start to apply for their first grants, those trying to get protected time in their first faculty positions, and those in their faculty positions with funding gaps. I know I've thrown a lot at you. I'm trying to bring together some questions, but the funding question is a recurring theme in our Q&A, and we're seeing that across the career span of those who are attending today. First ones, first position, funding gaps.
As vice chair for research, I have a lot of faculty in all those kinds of problems. And first, when you're applying for a position, you should shop around to see if there's places that you can get protected time, and how is that structured? Is it structured based on a chair's package? Very often a chair has a package to develop junior faculty. And your best chances of being one of those people to be considered is to have had publications and some pilot work and grant work and things like that. If you came in the door with a grant, I train my T32 candidates, and when they finish their T32 fellowship, they have a K application. It may not be funded, but they have an application in hand. That can help a chair a lot in seeing how well you write, how well you can be productive. And so when you're trying to develop those packages, you want to answer the concerns that a chair is going to have. Is this somebody that's going to make it? Am I protecting them? Am I going to lose all my money? Or is this somebody that's going to make it because they've been productive, and how well do they write? As far as gaps of funding, we all experience gaps of funding, and we are always trying to write grants. And something that chairs are always looking for is, are you being productive? That helps. If you're actually applying, you're getting scores and things like that. Are you learning from the mistakes that you've made and improving on that? But the most common way of managing gaps in funding is to be on someone else's grant, to be a co-investigator, to be on a co-investigator on your mentor's grant, to bring in a pharmaceutical trial, or to be a site PI of some other study. And that gives you some time. It's not protected in that you're supposed to be doing that grant too, of course, but it does help so that you can continue to develop your research career. So again, arguing with chairs about funding, and then in gaps of funding, being a good collaborator. One of the most important keys you can have is collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Make friends. Be a good co-investigator of other people's studies. That'll help you continue to maintain a protected time.
Thank you. And other panelists, any other guidance around this? We've got a lot of funding questions. Any other experiences that any of you would like to share?
I'd like to chime in, actually building upon what Dr. Wu mentioned. Is that okay? So one thing that was told to me that was quite unconventional from my chair when I was a resident was leave. And I thought, why do you want me to leave? I have a house here. I want to do a sleep fellowship here. And he told me, then I have to pay you to come back. And that's one of the things that I think is an insightful message that's important to recognize and may even resonate with what Dr. Higginbotham's experience is. If you're a fellow at the institution where you want to be faculty, what is their incentive to hire you? Zilch, right? They don't have to work to give you a package because you're already there. There's inertia to get away, but it's harder for them to bring you in. And so I think that was the hallmark of what he was telling me, is these hiring packages that tend to be multi-year, give you runway and some protected time to build that K award for an early career award, for example, for your first job, are less common in the institution that you're at, unless of course you're already fitting a niche. But then that niche is also something that you need to be understanding, because each department is trying to fill out their portfolio. And so a chair has to say, hey, I need to increase this area of research or this area of clinical expertise. We need a dystonia expert. So if you're not going to fulfill that need, it's much harder, particularly if you're not fulfilling that need and you're at the same institution, it's much harder for the chair to justify getting this huge package to develop an early faculty member into a space that they don't have a need for. So those are the two things that are critical. Is one is being recruited into an institution, there's a justification to give you a package after a national search if you're the right candidate. And two, even once you're there, even at an institution, to make sure that you're fitting within the vision of the growth of that division or that department, to make sure that, oh yeah, I'm fulfilling this need, so they can actually funnel money there, maybe even benefactor dollars or what have you. But there are ways that the chair can justify, hey, we're growing a stroke division and we need to support this individual's career here because they're the stroke person who's building this program here. So those are two gaps that you need to identify in the kind of negotiation strategy. How am I going to help your mission with my skill set? Because if it's not going to align, you may not actually be able to survive if they don't have dollars to put there in the long term. But also, again, that recruitment strategy to the institution you want to end up at was like the total mind-blowing thing to be told to leave just so that they can hire me back.
So along those lines, oh, Dr. Higginbotham, yes, please.
No, I'm sorry to bust in, but like just wanted to clarify, yeah, even if it's just to leave to do other interviews, like one of the things I just really wish I had done more of is I really had my heart set on my home institution from fellowship, and I just assumed I was going to get some grant and fellowship and stay, and I would be able to do what I wanted to do. And I just never imagined I would be sitting there in March being like told, okay, there's no money to float you, you don't have funding, and then having to kind of go last minute to mentors. So the other thing I'll say is I wish I had just done more research, gotten like outside, gotten more job interviews, because even though I fell back in with my mentors who were really champions and found this mechanism for me to get protected time at the last minute, the thing is that I joined faculty as something called a senior associate. So it was like actually more of like a glorified research fellow. So it was definitely not like an ideal way that I think a lot of people would envision starting their career. But the nice thing about it is I got the protected time, and I was recently promoted this year. So I spent 2 years in that position and did that. So it was a trade-off, but I think I could have had a even better start if I had, one, gone to those older mentors earlier, and two, just did a little bit more leaving, so to speak, and looking out there to see what else was out there.
Congratulations. That's fantastic. You know, I think that both of you raised those unspoken, often not discussed types of advice. So I want to go to Dr. Meyer because you've had the opportunity to work in different environments. And how do you approach getting that inside scoop or outside advice on how to think about your branch points in decision making as it relates to your career?
So thank you for the question. So I mean, I think I share many of the experiences that the other panelists just described. I mean, I had a pretty traditional academic career starting out and had many of the same challenges. And I just want to echo the be willing to leave and be willing to put yourself out there so that you can understand what value you're bringing to an organization. And you'll never find out if you just, it's really safe to stay at your home institution because you kind of know how everything works, you know where people are, you know who they are, but it's really, really important to put yourself out there and interview at places because you may find that other institutions are, one, looking for somebody just like you and are willing to really invest in you and in your career in a way that your home institution isn't. And not because you're not of value, but because typically when you have a fellowship program, you have a couple fellows coming out every year and you can't hire all of them into one department. And so it can be a real challenge to stay, particularly where you train for fellowship. And so, yeah, one of the key things that my mentors also told me was leave. And then I think in terms of grants, the one thing that I just want to say is just apply, keep applying, definitely learn from your mistakes, but you definitely will not get funded if you don't apply. And be creative in sourcing your funding, because and ask other people at your institution or in your department or distant mentors about kind of the unusual places that they have gotten money to help support them as they transition to independent faculty members. Because I think I had a fellowship through the Fogarty International Center. I had a fellowship from the AAN. I had a small startup grant from my institution. I had another sort of junior faculty grant and these were all the things that kind of tided me over through gaps in funding. So look around, you won't find them if you just kind of sit there and say, woe is me, I have a gap in funding, but ask around, because I would say most institutions understand that their faculty are going to have gaps, and there are kind of small grants to help tide you over, to help you get that critical pilot data to be competitive for a K award or an R21. And so seek those out. And there's usually we have a vice chair of research on the panel, but usually there is, a mechanism at your institution to help you see what those opportunities are. So I didn't really answer the question, so now I'll do that quickly. But I think, for me, I took I took kind of a big left turn. I think all of us took left turns that we didn't necessarily plan for. I think when you do that, one of the most important things is to just do your homework the way that you would if you were seeing a patient with a disorder that was unfamiliar to you. What do? You hit the literature, you read, you talk to other people that have experience in that, particular disease state. It's the same thing with, a change in the direction of your career. Talk to people that have followed similar paths, read about, look at the literature and see, who is working at that kind of an institution, and ask around. And we call it informational interviewing. Do informational interviewing. If somebody is working in a place and you think, wow, that seems like kind of an interesting thing, just ask them if you can do an informational interview. Ask them about how they spend their day. What does their position look like? What are their duties and responsibilities? What is their promotion potential? Ask all those questions, because you also may find things that are a better fit for you than academics. I probably shouldn't say that, and the AN may not invite me back now. There are ways to be engaged in research that are outside of academics as well. And so explore those. And I would just say, just don't be shy. Most people love talking about themselves. And so if you give them that opportunity, they will probably tell you more than you wanted to know.
Yes, I will echo that. There are many, many options for career paths in science that go beyond academia. And I think we know what we see. One of the interesting things about the AAN meeting is that if you really look carefully, you start to see what some of those different options are. So come to the meeting or go to the meeting and really take a look at who the speakers are and what they do. And if you go to the experiential learning areas, you'll start to see some of those ways that not only different options in science, but different options just for careers in neurology and what that can look like. Those ELA areas are really great for learning more about career options and career paths in neurology in all different kinds of settings. I think there are many more options than what are presented to us or what are in front of us during medical school and residency. So taking some time, as Dr. Meyer suggests, to explore that is fantastic. Dr. Wu, I'm going to sum up one of the things that you said, is sort of bring something to the table when you're coming to your division chief or your department chair, whether that's with a request or an open discussion. That could be a plan, it could be a grant, it could be publications. So for someone who's starting out in residency or fellowship, really building their research career, what kind of goal setting should they do so that they can be in position to bring something to the table?
Great question. Having done a lot of mentorship, there's basically two phenotypes. There's the person that's very productive, doing a lot of stuff, and there's this person who really struggles to finish any projects. So identifying people who can finish projects and finish tasks and so forth is something that can help somebody who has almost no publications and no grants, but be able to argue that they will be able to get to that point. Applying for grants is an experiential thing. We all have to go through that process of learning how to write. And so I would say that if you're in a residency or in a fellowship program, there are opportunities to pick up a manuscript or an abstract or a research idea. It's very hard to start a research project and see it all the way through to a manuscript. It's extremely hard. One of the things that I do for my department is I have this thing called the manuscript list. We basically have a bunch of faculty who have done all the work and just need somebody who can just take it that last little bit into a manuscript. And we created this thing that was incredibly popular. Residents could then pick up an abstract or an idea and take it all the way, do a little bit more, learn more about it, and they learn about research and take it all the way. And it's been something that great mentors can do for their mentees. They're not interested in themselves. A mentor, different from a coach, is interested in you. A coach is interested in how to for the team to win, but a mentor is interested in how do I make you successful, whatever it is that you're trying to do. So I think there are tons of ways that you can get involved and to be able to show that kind of productivity and being able to finish that can help when you're trying to get into a position.
Thank you. I want us to shift to talking a little bit about how it all works. And I'd actually like to hear from all of you on this and thinking about a few things. There are questions about how do you balance coming into a faculty position and really adapting to what it's like to be the attending or to manage your residency or fellowship clinical demands, along with doing the research, applying for funding, working on publications. And for many, these are times, being a student, resident, fellow, early faculty, for many, that's a time when they're also thinking about starting or expanding their family. So how do you keep it all going? I know we start with Dr. Higginbotham and we'll work our way around, but I do want to hear from all of you on this particular question or set of questions.
I was afraid you'd start with me, but basically, I mean, I think the life aspect, maybe some other people have, you just have to, I don't know how to advise people. I feel like that's work-life balance is so kind of subjective, but I think I entered this point where I just try to make sure I'm putting a lot of effort into every aspect of my life and not overgiving to one. But I really wanted to just touch on one thing, which is that since I've been attending since 2018, I feel like there's these moving components to being a good physician scientist. And there's like clinic, of course, but then there's like data generation. And then there's like the writing part, like grant production and manuscript production. And then the clinic grant manuscript production, and then the data generation. And I think it's really hard to do all three of those on your own. So now what I'm learning is, so the first couple of years, what I actually did, and I think if you can get a mentor who's well established and can help you do this, is I spent clinic time and mostly manuscript preparation and grant preparation, and not a whole lot of data generation. So one of the nice things in my lab is that they put out a lot of data sets, and I was able to take some of these data sets, and the data had already been generated, like the bench stuff had been done, and kind of coalesce them in lead projects and come out with manuscript preparation, which made my grants more competitive and everything like that. That was a particular lab aspect that I could benefit from. But I think the most important thing when you're starting out your career is like trying to get some manuscripts together and trying to apply for as many grants as possible, because that is like going to help you get funded and get your feet on the ground. So now that I've had some grants, I think like at R21, what I'm discovering now is like, I'm starting to do more of the experiment, like the data generation part. And it is like impossible to do all those things on your own. And now like my mentors are, well, you need to hire people and you need to expand, because now you're never going to like, you know, once you get some funding, like you got to build your team. And I just never, I know it sounds crazy, but I just never thought of myself as owning my own lab and like trying to now corral other people together. But I am now starting to realize, as I spend 2 days each week in lab, just trying to generate data and not writing any grants right now and everything, that in order to balance everything out and be successful, I think you're definitely going to have to build your own team. And it's a step that you're going to have to take, and I'm going to have to take, you know, in the next few years to be successful. And you can't do it without like other people and mentoring other people. So at some point you have to become like, I don't even know if there's a career. I always just considered myself like as going through lab, and, you know, Alan Levy and Nick Seafried will be the last authors and everything. And then I'll just do, but I think like in order to be successful and to balance everything, you're going to have some people who data generate for you or manuscript prep for you and things like that. And you need mentors in their first couple of years that can help you get to that point so you can build a team.
So Dr. Schneider, what about you? How do you balance it all? Clinical demands, family, hobbies, health, and learning to run and manage a lab. There are questions about that. Where do I learn to do that? How do I find resources to build my team and run a lab, just like Dr. Higginbotham was saying?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a difficult question. I don't think I have the best answer. But my knowledge is just like entrepreneurs. If you're going to want to be an academic clinician scientist, you're the one who wants to work 80 hours, not to work 40 hours. And that's essentially the story. It's you basically fit everything in where you can, when you can. So, you know, up before the kids, working, kids go to bed, working, right? It's basically trying to fit those parts in, and that you have to love it, right? If you don't love it, then you don't want to do that, right? But if it is something that you think that you can do, where you can fit these pieces where no part hopefully feels deficient, but also that you're not over investing in any given part, which is how you make other parts feel deficient, is how you do that. So it's just, I basically fit it in where I can, right? So we'll go on a vacation, but that's the plain time for me to write grants. So that's the plain time for me to write papers, right? So it's like everybody else gets to sit and zone out on a movie, and I get to spend 6 hours on a plane writing papers. So it's, you fit it in where you can. And actually, to what Dr. Higginbotham was mentioning is that, particularly his early career, I mean, even when you even get your CDA or your Career Development K Award, right? So CDA is an internal mechanism to the VA, which is the equivalent of a K from the NIH. You're not getting paid to get data, right? Even for those first 5 years, you have $50,000 max for your data generation. Everything else is for your pittance of a salary. And so from that standpoint, you're not often writing grants, as somebody told me, for the research you're going to do. It's actually writing the grant for the research you've done, essentially. You already have this data gathered. You're generating the papers off of that. So you need this runway. Like IT32, on the last month is when I finally got the genetic pipeline done and complete to be able to write the paper that is still being written for one of the main analyses, right? It's one of these things that you build up this network of experts, you build up this knowledge base, you build up this skill set that then starts to pay dividends down the road. And you actually start, I mean, granted, all the while, hopefully you can be getting little projects, doing a, you know, turning lit search into a review paper, things like that, creative, innovative ways, or even in residency, you're doing, hey, this is a case report that actually prompted a lit review that then facilitated a research question, et cetera. You're always trying to find those avenues. And that's where Dr. Wu's suggestion of, hey, here's some papers that need to be written, somebody needs to write them, the data's there. These types of foundational aspects that kind of keep you moving and keep you doing things are ways to help build that momentum that then you start paying off on the skills that you've built. And then you actually start to get to fit in all these things. And then at some point, as Dr. Higginbotham highlighted, you're not a scientist anymore. You're a business manager, right? You're managing your grant portfolio. You're doing interviews to hire people, hiring postdocs and PhDs. They're actually doing much of the science, and you're not in the lab anymore. This luminary who was working with Sanger sequencing and figured out the hypocretin receptor asked me to do some things in next generation sequencing. I was like, that's impossible, sir, because he hasn't touched genetics for 10 years, right? He's out there doing PR, giving lectures to support the lab. He's talking to foundations. He's getting grants, and that's what he's spending his time doing. He's not in the lab doing it. We have lab meetings and we pontificate, and then it's like, hey, person, do the real world part. And so that also has to be something that you have to recognize. Your end game is not your now game. For actually much of a successful research career, except for all but some very extreme people who can spend a lot of time in the lab and manage these huge labs, most of your job is management. It's not in the lab. And so just recognize that transformation that will happen. And and you said, how does that skill set get acquired? Well, again, it's mentorship. You have to learn from people. You have to see what they're doing. They have to be on your level and candid with you about what your stage of career is, what your next steps are. That means talking to your chairperson. That means talking to your mentors and making sure that you're getting expert advice as to this next step. Are you ready to take it? Is this what you want to do? And you have to have some clear-eyed ideas about that now, recognizing what the end game. Look at these high-powered researchers. Dr. Hallett was out of the country 2/3 of the year. Getting a meeting with him was virtually impossible. You're not out of the country 2/3 of the year and doing electrophysiologic fMRI or fMRI studies, right? So just recognize what the end game of being a clinician scientist ultimately might mean, which may not be the excitement of research that you're thinking now, but it also is an exciting area. So just think about how you might be getting there and what steps you need to do to get there.
Thank you. And to go to Dr. Meyer, we haven't really talked about our personal lives. And I'm wondering if you might share a little bit about how you bring it all together and keep things together, balancing family and work and everything.
So I will just share, and I'm a little bit of a salty person. So when I was a resident and a fellow, I would go to all these talks on work-life balance and what it means to be a woman researcher. And I would leave really angry because I just felt like there is this unachievable bar every time we use the word balance with regard to work and life. And I honestly just made up my own term because it makes me feel better. I just call it the work-life juggle because I feel like that's what we're all doing. And when you kind of have this unachievable standard of, perfect balance, it's not, I don't feel like it's something any of us really achieve. And to me, I have 2 daughters. They are 11 and 13. And I mean, I started a global health research career pregnant with my second child. I went off to Kenya and I had a 18-month daughter, which, by the way, it's a whole lot easier to do global health research with really small children because you just pack them up and take them with you. But it really became very challenging when they hit school age. And I think, as your career choices move forward, you have to make choices. Can I spend 80 hours a week on my job or not? I think particularly as women, we face additional issues and expectations about our role in the family and our role with children. And there's judgments placed on us about how much time we spend at work versus how much time we spend at home with our kids. I have a wonderful spouse. He really pitches in with doing family stuff and housework and that kind of thing. But I'll tell you, the buck still stops with me. And so, I think those are real challenges. And ultimately, for me, it's been a matter of making choices, making a schedule, setting out what are the goals that I really want to achieve. And this is probably hardest for many of us on here because we get really excited, but learn to say no and learn to say no to things that are not kind of in your core path of things that you want to do. And they may be exciting, but I think trying to stay as focused as you can about, where you want to go next and talk to your mentors and get advice on, is this something that I should be doing or not? And sometimes that mentor that you're asking cannot be someone at your own institution. Because as wonderful as many of our mentors are, they need somebody to do the work to help them get the next grant and, help them build their UO1 and that sort of thing. So make sure you're also asking people and find those mentors outside of your institution who really don't have a vested interest in you doing any kind of grunt work for them so that they can tell you, that's probably not great value for you and your career. See if you can find a nice way to get out of doing that particular task. I think particularly for folks who are women, people of color, people who are LGBTQ, we also get called on to serve on lots of committees panels, hiring, hiring committees. So I think there as well, if that is not a main focus of your career, when you're really early and trying to establish yourself, figure out what is most important to you in your career, and learn to say no to a lot of those things.
That's a really huge one. Focus. Dr. Wu, we are on our last minute. I'm going to give you the last word of overarching advice to end our session on. Share some wisdom.
Well, I'm going to tell you that I'm a little bit different from the others. I definitely believe work is for work and home is for home. When I go home, I go home. And I try not to bring a whole lot of work home. I have a lot of hobbies. Piano, I picked up guitar, picked up knife throwing, which is a lot harder than they can look at in movies. I've been to most of my kids' games, and I love that life. And I think it makes me more productive. If there's any advice that I have, it is you must prioritize. Any task that you have could fill up 40 hours a week of work. Any task that you have, you've got to prioritize what's the most important thing to you. Is it your career? For me, by care of my patients, they're probably going to be the highest thing I need. I can't let somebody die. I've got to go and take care of that patient before I can do other things. Prioritizing is a very key part. And there are many things that seem urgent, but aren't really that terribly important to your whole career path. And it's hard for any of us to give you specifically, any individual, the career advice that's going to be perfect for you. What's the priorities? Figure out what's your priority. I want to do this, I want to do that. Same thing with science, by the way. If you're trying to get a grant, I don't know if that's the best way of getting it. If you're trying to do the best science you can, that's how you end up getting the grants to do that science. So try and figure out what's the priority for you. And then the other thing that I think all three have said is scheduling, planning out, plan. I block out time many weeks to months in advance for something that's really important, a grant, a mentee's grant or something like that. I block out that time. So prioritization, but try and have a life. It's your kids, family, your hobbies, the joy of these things. They make you more efficient and effective in your job.
That's a perfect place for us to end. What I heard from all of you today is to find your passion, find support, ask questions, and prioritize. And I hope that today's session was helpful. We tried to get to as many questions as we could. Thank you so much for your engagement. And just as a reminder, the e-posters are open. So feel free to visit those and engage with those presenters. And thank you all. And thanks so much to our panelists for a fantastic discussion.